would you need to see before you can say that America is no longer systemically upholding white supremacy or oppressing black people?
I think that's a target that I'm not necessarily aiming at. I'm not necessarily aiming at getting to a place where I can say we're no longer systemically racist. Where I'm aiming is that we're no longer ignoring the problem. We're no longer suppressing our history. We're no longer unwilling to have the tough conversation and make the necessary changes.
CRT is a positive resource for confronting racism.
I think that's true. I think it is a positive resource. Do I think it's complete or perfect? No, I don't. I actually think there is a bit of pessimism present. If I were to give my critique, you've been giving your critique. If I were to give my critique of critical race theory, is that there is a bit of a pessimism present in critical race theory that's influenced by probably Derek Bell the most, in my opinion. He operated as a critical race theory from this belief that it's white people at the top of the system and everybody else below. And if you can't get white people, then you can't get anything, right? And so I get that. I get that that's the view from which that one critical race theorist came from, but he was influential. And I do think that there's a pessimism present in critical race theory that needs to be addressed. And I think some of the more modern critical race theorists like Ian Haney Lopez, Heather McGhee, I think they're doing some great work to bridge that gap and to have a much more optimistic view. With that said, I think it is a helpful tool. I think it gives some great language that we've discussed today. I think the 6 tenets, which people rarely talk about, the 6 tenets of critical race theory, but I think these tenets in isolation, independent from this conversation, are incredibly agreeable. That most people hear those things and almost accept them as almost like a true, like just true, right? Like it's just kind of like common sense. I think it's helpful. I think it puts some really helpful language around it.
Yeah. Naturally, I don't think it's a helpful tool. I appreciate what you said about Derek Bell, in that, I would say that all critical race theorists are pessimistic, but yes, he was especially pessimistic. And I think because he's so influential, he is the founder of critical race theory, or at least modern critical race theory. His impact.
I would just put a pin there and say I wouldn't call him the founder. I see he's one of them for sure, and it's definitely important. But I don't want the audience to come away from this thinking that this one person is central and the most important. He's not the most.
I know that. I know that his ideas were around before he himself expressed it in his essays and books. But if I don't spend too much time on that, but the person who coined it, Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell and other people, they really helped to ground what it has become today in many ways. But no, I don't think it's helpful because it redefines racism. It redefines, you mentioned some of the tenets, and one of the tenets, of course, is that racism is the norm in the West, and that's not true. I think that inherently creates the pessimism that a lot of critical race theorists have about Western society. I think that sin is the norm, of course, but I think in the same way that's also sin is the norm for white people and sin is the norm for black people. And I think when we see racism as this unique entity instead of a sin that all people are guilty of. When I face God, I will be judged for all of my sins, including my partiality against different kinds of people, including people who are more handsome than me, which would be you. And that would be true for being racist towards or partial towards some white people as well too. And I think critical race theory has a view that really limits truly the depravity for sin for all people, and that concerns me. Another thing that I wanted to say is, our conversation. I've enjoyed speaking to you, but critical race theory has become so influential, and it is when it's saying to people, when it's saying to black people that you are a victim first and foremost. That's not true. I think it's harmful to be teaching. So I'll give you an example. When I came to Canada, I was 10 years old originally. And one of the first things my mom said to me, because she was influenced by certain people, she said, Sam, I was a very violent boy. And she's like, Sam, I told you not to fight in Ghana, you didn't listen. I'm gonna tell you, you cannot be fighting here. You definitely cannot be fighting white people because you are black and the cops come, they're gonna put you to jail. My mom sincerely believed this. She regrets it now because my very first day of school, this white boy saw me talking to who I learned later on was his white girlfriend. I guess he had a girlfriend early in his life, but he started saying some words to me in French. I was in Montreal at the time, it's a French side of Canada, and he was saying things that I would later learn were racist. My very first day of school, and he beat me up. I didn't do anything because I remember what my mom said, that if I fight back, if I'm violent, I'll be put to jail. And I couldn't go to school for a week or two because I was really injured. And then also because of that same statement, I was actually lost one day. Montreal's a very big city. I was lost. I got off the wrong stop, and I'm walking around. I have no idea where I am. I'm new to the country, new to the city. I saw cops driving by. I wanted to just say, "Hey, man, help me get home." But I was afraid. I'm 10 years old. But I'm afraid that these cops are racist because I'm black and they're white and they are oppressive. And I walked around for several hours in this city before I finally said, I have no choice. Another cop, when I ran to just say, please, I was fearful, please take me home. And they took me home, and I look back now, my mom regrets that, but what I was told, that because you are black, because you're a victim, it affected me, it hurt me in my life. One of my friends has a great line, which is that, when we're told as black people, for example, that because you're black, you have to work twice as hard as other, I'm sure you probably heard this statement before, because we're black, we have to work twice as hard as white people to have the same success they have. Then why do you work? Why? It's not motivating to a lot of people. It damages a lot of black people. So critical race theory is not only attacking white people, I would say it's also attacking black people as well, as seeing ourselves as nothing but victims.
I appreciate you sharing your story, and some of those things are traumatic, right? And I don't think it's appropriate to litigate or work through what was appropriate, what wasn't. And, that's just your experience, and I'm sorry that you had those experiences. I'm also very happy that you got home safely, to say the least. I will say, that those things are not necessarily critical race theory. That would be my response here. And I think, those things are legitimate parts of the Black experience. That saying that you said is certainly a part of the Black experience. But I wouldn't categorize that as critical race theory. And I kind of think that's the problem that we're having in, not this conversation, this has been a phenomenal conversation, but the larger conversation really ascribes, it just tosses anything into critical race theory. And I know that many of the modern, critical race theorists, they kind of are looking on and just aghast that this obscure academic theory is a catch-all for so many disparate racial experiences and thoughts and ideas. And so I mourn that because it really hinders us from having a deep and meaningful conversation about the actual content of what I think is a helpful tool.
Yeah, very quickly, I think the reason why I would say that is critical race theory is because, as we both agreed, critical race theory says that racism is the norm. And that's one of the tenets. Yeah, it's ordinary.
Ordinary.
And if that's the case, that's going to shape how black people think, including young black people. So ideas have consequences, right? Their tenets have consequences. So, of course, since they say it's the norm, it's evolved and progressed to even far worse than what they were originally saying.
So to clarify that point, and I know that we're probably needing to move on, but to clarify that point, when they say that it's ordinary, it's not to say that every single interaction is influenced by that. That's not what they're saying. If we read what they're actually saying, and it's not hard, I think if we read the text of critical race theory, they're saying that it is ordinary in that it's commonplace. It's not uncommon for you to have had a negative experience with a police officer. That would not have been an uncommon, strange, aberrational, how in the world could that happen? It'd be relatively ordinary for something like that to happen. Doesn't mean that I've had plenty of phenomenal interactions with police officers. I have one of my really good friends is a police officer. So my point is that those experiences might not be representative of every experience that you have, but it's also not something that exists outside of the framework of what is fairly ordinary in this country for someone to get pulled over for driving while black, or for someone to be assumed to be an immigrant because they're Latino. This is what they mean by when they say it's ordinary or kind of normal, which is different, a little bit different than what you're describing.
Since we're talking about some of the tenets of critical race theory, one of them, of course, is a phrase that I always struggle with, but it's intersectionality, right? Which would include that we Christians, or anybody who would embrace critical race theory, also has to embrace all of its aspects, in the sense that we have to embrace its thinking, its concepts on feminism, or on LGBTQ ideas and things like that. And this, as a Christian, this deeply concerns me. All of critical race theory concerns me, except for that one point I mentioned that that I agree with, which is that race is a social construct.
Yeah.
But as a Christian, one of the reasons why I'm so concerned about critical race theory is because a lot of my friends, a lot of people who've embraced critical race theory have also embraced those aspects as well too, where they're embracing ideas that are not compatible with Christianity in terms of whether it's abortion, which is destroying it's destroying 300,000 black babies a year. It is destroying the black mothers who are being manipulated to have their babies killed. It's also ignoring the issues of fatherlessness. And then, as I mentioned, it's also leading many professing Christians to embrace LGBTQ ideas, which are contrary to the scriptures. So, since you support critical race theory, what would be your thoughts on that?
So, to intersectionality. Intersectionality is really descriptive. It's descriptive of the way that our differing identities are intersecting with our racial identity and the law. Again, always have to bring it back to the law, which means that you and I are black, I think. We're men, I think. No, I'm just kidding. No, that was too far.
No problem.
We're black, we're men, right? And so those two identities mean that our intersection, the way we interact with the world, is kind of unique. It's very unique, especially as black men. We were kind of talking offline a little earlier about being black men walking into an elevator with a white woman. Or even let's talk about the police. Mass incarceration is a real issue that I think we can agree with. Maybe we can't, but either way, mass incarceration means that you and I are more likely to be incarcerated, particularly because of our black male identities, these two identities. We're black men who are Christians and we're married. And that means that we have some unique experiences at the intersection of those identities that are directly related to those identities. The same can be said, let's say, of a black woman who's a lesbian. She's gonna be facing, for her blackness, racism, for her gender, sexism, and for her sexuality, she may face discrimination like homophobia. And these intersections of these identities are important to consider. And that's what they're doing. They're wanting to quantify, to say that racism isn't just this like super simple, like he called me the N-word, or she said this thing about whatever, my hair, right? Like, it's not just this simple low level stuff. They're really having to have like a really robust, rigorous conversation about race. And intersectionality is really important because the experience of a black lesbian woman is different than a white straight man.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the original meaning of intersectionality. I know Kimberly Crenshaw covered the three cases, the legal cases, dealing with double discrimination, unique double discrimination that black women can face, not just because they're black, not just because they're a woman, but because they are black women. I'm familiar with that, but as it's evolved, and she herself has also affirmed this, that it also means embracing, certain concepts, whether it's gender theory, queer theory, and all these things as well too. So what I'm really addressing there is just my concern that because, a lot of Christians have embraced critical race theory and therefore redefined racism. Many of them have also redefined sexism and they've redefined homophobia, where now, because I'm a Christian who believes what the Bible says about LGBTQ issues, then many would label me as homophobic because I think that while I love people who are homosexuals or transgender, I believe that, of course, that is sin. And now people would say that that's in of itself homophobia or transphobic.
Hey friends, Greg here with Honest Discourse. We hope that you're enjoying this conversation. We are so excited for it to continue, but first, a brief message from our sponsor.
Hey friends, Pastor Matt here with Central Church. This episode of Honest Discourse is brought to you by Central Church in Collierville, Tennessee. Central Church got behind this discussion because we really believe that this is what our world needs more of. We desperately need more understanding, more loving conversations with Christ at the center. And Central Church is a Bible-teaching, Bible-believing church in Collierville, Tennessee. We exist to multiply and to mature disciples of Jesus Christ, to produce Christ-centered relationships. And so we want to just put that offer out to you. If you're ever in the area, we sure would love to meet you. Drop by Collierville, Tennessee, and see what God is doing at Central Church. God bless. Hope to meet you in person.
A huge thank you to Central Church for sponsoring this episode. Now back to the conversation.
There is a solution to ending racism.
Yes and no. I'm glad you mentioned Richard Delgado. Sorry, not Richard Delgado. Derek Bell earlier. Delgado is one of the other founders of critical race theory. Where he has what you said because of his pessimism, because he sees white people as the oppressor, and since in his mind white people will never accept ideas that he believes would ever harm their privilege or oppression or oppressive power, he would say that racism is permanent. I of course disagree with his thinking, and yet racism is permanent. It's permanent in America, it's permanent in Canada, it's permanent in Ghana. We will always have racism because we will always have sin, and racism is a sin. I recognize, of course, that racism can be limited, and it's happened. It's happened that racism is not as common as it used to be, and yet we will never, ever end racism. There's only one person who can do that, and that's Jesus Christ. He's the only person that when he returns, when he makes all things new, when he punishes those who do not obey him, when he saves and rescues those who do believe in him because of his grace, he will end racism in that he will establish the new Jerusalem and the new earth, and there will be no sin because his people will be glorified after being sanctified, and that there will be a completely perfect world where there is no sin in that way. So that is the only hope for ending racism.
Yeah, I similar to you, agree and disagree. I think what you're describing is true and in some ways incredibly pessimistic, right? That we will live in a world where Black infant mortality is as high as it is, that Black mothers will die at a higher rate than their white counterparts, where Black men will be in jail, where Latino people will sit on the border and live in absolutely terrible conditions. So I think it's incredibly pessimistic to just kind of accept it. And I'm not saying that you're accepting it.
Just to clarify, I wouldn't say those things are because of racism, just to clarify, but I understand why you believe that's the case.
Fair. Think where we maybe agree is that racism in some way exists, and we just kind of accept that it will exist until Jesus comes back, and we'll do our best to not be racist, but that's it. And I think where critical race theory actually introduces a great deal of optimism is that it helps us name some ways in which we can make society more fair and more equitable. And I think that's an important process. I think we have to have the hope that we can make this country a more perfect union, that we can make progress, that we can analyze the data and we can look at the ways in which laws are impacting people and people groups and make progress, try to fix it, do our level best. I think that's an optimism that I hold. And so while I don't necessarily think that we're ever going to completely eradicate racism, I don't think that's possible for all the reasons that you described. The heart is wicked. We're human beings. We're selfish by nature. I do think we can make progress.
Quick question. I know you mentioned that we can live in a more fair, more equitable society, what would that look like? What would you need to see in America to make it simpler in America for you to get to a point where you'd say that America is no longer systemically racist? We both know that racism will always be a reality against all people, black, white, Latino, indigenous. We are all sinful people. But in terms of America, what would you need to see before you can say that America is no longer systemically upholding white supremacy or oppressing black people?
I think that's a target that I'm not necessarily aiming at. I'm not necessarily aiming at getting to a place where I can say we're no longer systemically racist. Where I'm aiming is that we're no longer ignoring the problem. We're no longer suppressing our history. We're no longer unwilling to have the tough conversation and make the necessary changes. And that's a different aiming point.
But I think that's actually pessimistic, right? I think then there's no hope. If we cannot identify a moment in time where we can say, okay, America is no longer systemically racist, then there's no hope there. So I can say that, as a pro-life advocate, I rejoice that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, but I can say that I know when America will become pro-life. It's when all of America bans all abortions completely to save all babies. I can identify that. So, and it seems to me, I've asked a lot of critical race theorists and people who support critical race theory, and they can never identify when they believe America will stop being white supremacist. And I think that itself shows the hopelessness within critical race theory.
I don't think so at all. I think what critical race theory does for many of its adherents is it creates a paradigm within which we can make progress. We can aspire. I don't need a landing point of when all of this is done, then we will, be in the clear. And the reason for that is because it's a varied issue. We've been talking about so many ways in which society is unfair and things that we differ in our beliefs on, but it's such a complex issue, which is the whole thing of critical race theory is complicating and getting to the complexity of this issue. And so to say that this is the point, it's just not that simple. And I don't think it's fair for anyone to fool themselves into believing this that simple. I would even argue, actually I don't want to go there. I'll just say it's not that simple, and it's important for us to recognize that and commit to progress.